My name is Lowdru Hastings Robinson.
And I'd like you to just tell me all the places you've lived in your life.
Wow, that should be easy, but I'll give it a try. I lived in Bermuda first, then Canada, then in China, and then the UK. In the UK, I lived in Portishead, which is a suburb of Bristol. And I live right on the Bristol Channel. It's a marina, and it's a lovely location. I learned something in high school from a favorite teacher of mine, a concept called twice as good, which meant that if you were not a white person and you were living and working in a white society, you need to be twice as qualified to make sure you can get a job. So even though I was working as a teacher, I took extra classes. I got a bachelor's degree at Lakehead University. Take a step backwards. In 1977, Bermuda had its worst riot ever. But because it's a British colony, it was called disturbances. And as a result of that, there was a royal commission with an inquiry, which ended up being called the Pitt Report. And one of the things it recommended was that there should be a Ministry of Community and Cultural Affairs to work on community and race relations. So the government was seeking a director for that department. And of course, because I had a lot of respect for that particular teacher, she gave me the forms, I filled them out. I had no intention of going back there. A few weeks later, I got a phone call inviting me to come for an interview, all expenses paid. So I was able to get time off from school to go and do it. Long story short, I ended up in the job.
Tell me about that job and what you did in it, and tell me about that time in Bermuda.
Well, like I said at the beginning, I never intended to go back. But once I was offered the job, and I realized it was a job trying to develop better community and race relations, I actually thought of my grandfather, who was always talking about improving race relations. And I felt that here was an opportunity to at least try. I had no idea whether I could do it or not, but I had race relations experience working in Canada with certain communities, so I decided to go and give it a shot. But there was a real blessing in a way because the Pitt report that was done by this commission was an excellent overview of the problems in Bermuda with some suggestions as to what could be done to help remove some of these problems. I studied sentence by sentence and was able to come up with certain programs that became effective and really got me started.
Like, what did you come up with?
Well, the longest and best program was the idea that one should have respect for heritage, and not just a one-sided heritage, but heritage for all. And out of that came the idea that should be a special anniversary or a festival kind of approach so that people can learn a bit about each other's heritage without it being a threatening situation. And in Canada, I had worked on programs called It's Your Day, and it was communities of all the ethnic groups in a particular city with a kind of one-day affair, food of their culture, displays of their culture, and that sort of thing. And I decided to try and do something like that. Also, the report had said on the 24th of May every year, there was an annual race of a half marathon. And that was the most integrated event in Bermuda. Black, white, brown people took part in that race. And I got the idea, in thinking back to what we used to do in Canada, was to plan a day where the race would be in the morning It would end at a large field where people would put on displays of food of their culture and art and other things of their culture, and organizing a parade to go through the main city and end at that particular location. That first parade was in 1979, and I got three people that helped me. One was Portuguese, one was Bermudian, and one was Trinidadian. They were the sort of cultures that existed in Bermuda. And those three men helped me to organize events and participants and floats from those particular groups. And we were able to successfully put on a parade for that day. And Bermuda Day was an outcome of that, because once we decided the 24th of May was the best time for that, because that was the date of the race, I managed to convince the powers that be to change it from Queen Victoria's birthday to Bermuda Day. And it was a very successful event, good press reports. And I'm happy to say this past year, I went to Bermuda to see that Bermuda Day celebration. It's the 44th time it has happened. The only time it stopped was the 2 years for COVID. And ironically, it rained cats and dogs that day, but the parade still went on. And to my amazement, people danced and marched in the streets like it was a sunny day. In human affairs, one of the things I was able to get the government interested in it was there was a Race Relations Act in place. Ironically, it had all the rules for race relations in terms of better treatment, but it had a commission with no staff. And so it was totally ineffective. So I was able to convince the government to change to a human rights act based on what I had grown up with in Ontario. And I also happened to have been very friendly with Dr. Dan Hill, who was the chairman of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and was able to have him come to Bermuda and help convince the government that human rights was a better concept than just race relations, because then you could deal with things like sex discrimination, age discrimination, physical and emotional discrimination, that sort of thing. So it was a very comprehensive act. And the human rights rule was under this new human affairs ministry.
And tell me more about this Human Rights Act, and how you were able to get it to come forward.
The Human Rights Act, the most difficult part was getting the legislation. But again, it was entirely based on the Ontario Human Rights Act, which Dr. Dan Hill was involved in. And it simply had to be adjusted a little bit to conditions of Bermuda. But the basic human rights concept came directly from that. And it set up a commission, but this time the commission had a staff. And the big difference was the staff could actually get involved in any kinds of discrimination. It's a basic concept of trying to settle problems as opposed to any kind of legal or financial redress.
When did it get passed?
It actually passed in 1981, and it's still in effect today.
That must make you feel great.
That was a real satisfying experience to see that come into place.
What kind of changes did you see in Bermuda after that?
Obvious changes in terms of job opportunities were a little more even. School desegregation was very effective. A sense of rights of everybody kind of changed. Particularly Black people felt more confident in competing and participating in society. But you don't change people's behavior by passing legislation. So segregation continued in other ways. You know, people would not get certain jobs because they were not qualified or whatever. But I must say, at this stage, in, in 2023, it's pretty effective, the human rights legislation. And if there was segregation there, it would be very subtle and not obvious at all. So it's a much more equal society. When I went to Bermuda, there were two political parties. One party was basically all white, and the other party was basically all black. Today in Bermuda, the premier is black. His party has both black and white people in. The opposition now is both black and white. So it's changed dramatically in the government. This was on a Sunday night, and there were 3 or 4 of my friends. You dressed like you were going to church. And this particular night after the service, we were passing by a restaurant, and we decided to go in for a Coke. So we all went in, we sat down, we were all nicely dressed. That's why we went in this particular restaurant. We were all so well dressed. They refused to serve us and made us leave. And I had just come from a religious experience saying everybody's God's child and the rest of it. And here they were, because we were the wrong color, and they literally said, we don't serve, in here. And the experience I had had on the previous Sundays, feeling very religious, turned me off totally. And from that point on, I had a concept of God, but it didn't mean anything to me, because I couldn't understand if there was a God. I'm a person, white people are persons. Why are they treating me like this if we're all going to end up going to heaven? And then I also sort of got into the concept of angels are white and God is white. And nobody white meant anything to me. So it turned me off totally. Then I used to go to a barber shop regularly. And my barber would always talk to me in terms of human relations, people being human. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, that, race relations is not the way it should be. And there will come a time when people will be treating each other equally. I thought this guy was insane. This is a segregated place, and you're talking like, there's an opportunity to be equal and the rest of it. So I said to him, where are you getting these strange ideas from? He said, well, I'll give you a couple of books, and you can check for yourself. It turned out they were Baha'i books, and he was a Baha'i. When I read some of the writings in the Baha'i books, I suddenly got a totally different feeling, because I felt that not only was I human, and I should accept somebody who's white, they are also human, and they should accept someone who is black. And instead of hating white people per se, I started feeling sorry for them, because they didn't know that we were both equal in terms of our humanity, and therefore should be treating each other better. And after reading a number of the books that he gave me, I actually became a Baha'i and joined the group that was trying to promote better race relations. The first thing that really struck me by this was when I met the Baha'is. They were black and white people. I was shocked, treating each other equally. That was better than anything I'd even read, the actual way they treated each other. Some of the ones who were white their families almost disowned them because of the kind of relationships they were having. They were having a difficult time, but they obviously accepted this concept and was prepared to work towards better relationships. So that was a real turning around for me.
What is your concept of God today?
My God, and this is totally the way I see it. I don't have a concrete concept of God, but I liken God to nature. That nature is not completely understood, but you can feel it and you can see it in the seasons and the changes in climate and all the rest of it. And I see God as something like that. You benefit from the experience of it, but you don't really comprehend it. And also, if you could comprehend it, it wouldn't be the right thing because you have limited knowledge as a person. And when you comprehend or understand something, you often make it in the image you want it to be. And you listen to the teachings of very wise persons who started religion. They always talk of God not as something man-made, but like a concept or an idea or something that's real, but not totally understandable. So I don't have a concrete concept of God. If I look at Michelangelo's paintings, I don't see that as God because I know that was one of his relatives that he used as a model for that. But and so I do have a sense that there's a power greater than me. I don't understand what it is.
Do
But
you feel like you've ever had to rely upon that power or chosen to rely upon that power?
I do in the sense that I like the idea of PMA, positive mental attitude, that power is available to you if you can not only imagine it, but live it and believe in it and keep, as long as it's positive, in terms you're not hurting someone or destroying yourself. That is a source to me of uh, working towards this knowledge of God, the power that gives life and the power that you can share in and become a part of, either positive or negative. And the choice is yours. That's the way I see it. The choice, I should say, is mine. I could work towards positive things or work towards negative things. I have the ability to do both. But in doing the positive, I'm being good to someone else and I'm being good to myself because when I help somebody else, I feel better.
Tell me about a critical time in your life where you feel like you acted with that power, that you took on that stance, took on that power, and it made a difference for you.
It's when I went back to Bermuda to work in the Ministry of Community Affairs. I still, when I took on the job, or even though I was going to work towards helping race relations, I still had this concept of black, white. And once I got to the stage of more positive thinking, I think that was the kind of power that my relationship of what I determined as God being positive that helped me to do the kind of work that I was doing. Because even though I was ending up with various projects and so on that worked out, there was a lot of negative things. I talked about the parade and how it's been going for 44 years. Well, in the planning of it, I had committees coming to me saying, don't put this in it and don't do that, leave the gumbays out, and various sort of negative things. But through all of that, because I had this concept that it's a positive thing to improve race relations with everyone, I was able to work in spite of the kinds of things that were trying to stop the work being done.
Tell me about raising a Baha'i family. Did you raise your daughter Baha'i?
It's interesting because my wife was very prominent and involved in the African Methodist Church. She was part of a trio. She was a singer, so she was very much involved. And she was totally against this idea of me becoming a Baha'i. And it wasn't so much, I guess it was a real confrontation. I still would go to church with her whenever she was performing or whatever. But she was really concerned that my soul was lost, I'm damned, and all the rest of it. So it was a problem for quite a while. And one day, out of the blue, she said to me, I'd like to go to one of those Baha'i meetings that you go to. I was stunned. You really want to go? She said, yes. You know those books you've been reading? And yeah, I started to read them. And I want to know more about this. My wife became a Baha'i from reading the books that I had at home. And she became a Baha'i after that. I never tried to teach her anything because I knew she was so involved with the church. Her reaction initially was very much against it. So when our daughter was born, we were in Northern Ontario at the time, small Baha'i community. So the community taught my daughter as much as we did. Yeah.
Pretty amazing then that your daughter chose to go to China as a Baha'i. And
She did. She was a pioneer in China. And at the time she went to China, even though I was a Baha'i, at that period, China politically was, for the rest of the world, leave that alone because communism and all the rest of it. And I never objected to her going because she was married and had one child at the time. No, three children at the time. And she went off to China, and I couldn't believe it. I've lost my daughter to the communists. So as soon as she got settled, I went to visit. What a revelation again. The people she introduced me to, ordinary Chinese people, very welcoming in their homes, they serve you food. Relationships were far better than I ever had in Bermuda growing up as a child. So she was working in a school, and somebody got sick, and my daughter wrote to me and told me about it. The person's going to be off for like a few months. Would you be interested in coming to fill in? So I went and taught in the school for a little while, and it was a K to end of high school, but they didn't have a counseling department. So I managed to convince them they needed that, and I was already a qualified counselor. So I set up the program and actually worked in that school for, I guess, a few years.
how did your Baha'i faith develop while you were in China?
That strengthened the concept of the oneness of humanity because Chinese were a distinct group of people. And certainly my total experience with them was like they were like any other people anywhere else I had lived. The same kinds of, not so much that they are different, it's how you relate to them, that you see that they are individuals and also human. So I think that broadened the concept of the international concept of the oneness of humanity.
When you think about your life right now and where you are in your life, what are you most grateful for?
I am most grateful to have, I'm 87. I've lived to experience not only seeing my daughter grow up and have the same concept that I have of the oneness of humanity and so on, but I've seen her children grow up and I've seen them develop in that way. And in fact, I was a counselor in a school. My daughter became a counselor in school. My grandson, Kyle, is a counselor. My granddaughter, Taya, is a counselor for women, particularly in terms of violence against women, and helping not only the women to understand it, but helping the men they deal with to understand it.